Good to see everybody on. This is Thursday, June 13th, 2024. This is 139 for C++ Generative AI. I'm Kevin Kawchek. I'm the founder CEO of Chemical Q Device. So we're going to be talking about this. C++ is a very popular language, especially if you want to convert something into being a lot more with higher speed, basically. So I'll cover some of these other platforms. Now, if you haven't gotten onto, and I would highly recommend to download whatever, you should be able to download whatever OS, the OpenAI, so it gets you ChatGPT 4.0. And what this allows you to do is standard large language model stuff, but it also allows you to do the advanced kind of multimodal language models that we're seeing roll out with the announcements with Apple this week and with others, especially with Gemini and with Android too. And basically, if you type in, so I said, produce a savable image regarding the benefits of C++ for generative AI inference. And then from that, I had to fine tune it a little bit. I'd say I'd either type it in or I could do the microphone and then I'd put it in and then I hit enter as far as adjusting the title. But you're going to see this stuff all rolled out as far as multimodal, and I saw an example of using generative AI to solve math problems just using iPad, writing out equations on a screen, really impressive stuff. So when it comes to C++, we're looking at high performance, memory efficient, cross-platform support, robust libraries, low latency. And it took about, I had to ask it, but I asked ChatGPT 4.0, which is kind of like the most recent version here, how long it took. And it said about 0.567 or 0.56 seconds to generate this specific image. And again, the sky's the limit, and you could do cool stuff on Meta AI. This was more like a diagram I wanted, but if you type in a Meta AI, you get cool stuff too. So focusing on the C++ aspect, it was developed by Björn Strustrup and released in 1985, so it's been around a while. And it's based on C, which is also known as the mother of all languages. Now, C++ is object-oriented programming, encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism, which basically means modularity is what you're getting, and portability. These types of the features, and those are the more of the benefits there. So it's widely used across operating systems, financial applications, scientific simulations, games, even like 2024 games, are primarily using C++. And I'll show you with the NVIDIA TensorRT that's primarily using C++. And they say it's compiled into machine code and then later linked, making it a fast and efficient language. So you can actually get to binary from here. So there's no interpreter. And C++ is known for performance, reliability, flexibility, and complexity is that we get with it. So so there's a couple of things. If you want to be in generative AI, especially moving forward, you really want to use, it's called Grok. So that's how I asked how to say it. Okay, so Grok is associated with Tesla's model, this 300-something billion parameter model that's now open source. Now, Grok is an inference engine, right? So this is generative AI models. Now, this specific one, I picked the fastest one, typically. It's over 1,200 tokens per second. So frame of reference in this talk, I was able to get over 100 on a MacBook Pro. So it partly depends on the model and if it's compressed. If it's compressed to smaller size, you can get the higher speeds. So basically, it shows you the tokens per second output, 1228 right there. And then, times and stuff like that. So these are related. So if you have time and tokens, you can generate tokens per second. Now, I asked it, how does Grok use C++? And it says Grok is a query engine that uses C++ as one of its primary languages. Here are some ways that Grok uses C++. Query execution, data structures, memory management, performance critical code, integration with other languages, extensibility. And then if you look at the bottom here, so they call it, so it's an ASIC, so application specific, to make it run fast on specific your hardware. And it's basically the software kind of hard coded into the hardware. And they also use Go, Python, and Java and Rust. and this is, I think they're number 4. But in these other libraries, they also use some of them use some aspect of C++ as well. Now, if you haven't gone on, so C++ is relatively easy to get. I was anticipating with this it to be so significantly different than Python and all of my Python experiences, but it's very similar thought processes as far as include IOStream is kind of like your import with Python. And in this specific case, I use three different IDEs. Right now, I'm kind of on the C Lion just because I'm heading on to almost finished or almost getting done with a second tutorial, kind of like code longs. So they use C Lion. I downloaded C Lion. It's nice. And then you have VS Code, and I was on that with my previous hardware. And of course, Xcode. And the thing about C++ is there's not a ton of libraries supported by Xcode initially. Was there a question? So, if you look at it, it's basically you have Swift for Apple, you have Objective-C, you have C, and you have C++. So it's good to see that, you can use C++, it's portable, and it's well supported across all these other IDEs. And I don't think that's the case for Python with X there. So it's definitely, one of those, the perks of using C++. So I said, hello, generative AI drug discovery world at each of these. And of course, it's supposed to print that. You have to have the IOStream, and you have to have this std cout. There's a way to not keep saying std, up here, but basically you need the cout, so and then your statement, and then it'll return this 0. It's supposed to. So it did that for all of them except for the VS Code. So I'm still looking into that. So don't be afraid of C++, I would say, and it's the same kind of like thought processes that I went through. One, his name's Mosh, and I'm going through one. It's he was originally with Giraffe Academy, and then he's kind of I think Free Code Camp kind of bought his videos or something like that. So both of those are really good. Now this other one, so this is another gentleman here that did this specific one, and the first thing you do if you have Mac, brew install. That's kind of like a fix-all for some issues in the past. Now, when you download these models, so the Mistral 7 billion parameter model, and the best thing to do is a lot of times for these to run, especially on iOS and iPad OS or Android devices, is you're using this GGUF format a lot. And as far as I know, it's just a single file. But this Q4, relates to, it's a 4-bit quantized model, and this KM means something as well. So that's the one I tried to use with this one. I wasn't able to get this one to work, but he says, write me a poem of a maximum of 3 verses of Mistral, about Mistral AI. So Mistral is a generative AI leader that just got, I think, $600 million funding, and they just partnered with IBM as well. And so they have the open source portfolio. They also have, now this proprietary portfolio with IBM. So it says, Mistral AI, the genius in code, a beacon of innovation uncloaked, creating wondrous worlds in data's vast abode. In the realm of language, it gracefully glides. With every word it learns, it never hides, unraveling secrets where knowledge resides. And I put continued there because it has one more phrase. So it did a good job with this specific one. So again, this is running locally on his laptop. And again, I had some issues with the model. So -M means model and -P means prompt. Okay. So it was either the model or metal. I'm still trying to figure that out, but I tried different download sources, and this is a relatively new laptop here. So hopefully I can get that figured out. Now, his tokens per second. So again, the size almost directly correlates to the speed. So in this specific case, a 7 billion parameter, LLM, that's Q4. So it's not going to be its full, say, 15 gigabytes. It's probably somewhere like 4 or 5, or probably high 3s up to 5. And then anyways, he on his hardware, I think he was on some other previous Mac, Apple Silicon, 44 tokens per second on the output. And you see it's always higher usually for the prompt eval. So the two ones you want to look at when you get going is basically the prompt eval time going up to tokens. prompt eval time going up to tokens per second, and then eval time going up to tokens per second. So these are the two that you'll see a lot, this 158 tokens per second for the prompt. So tokens is very similar to Word, and then 44 for the generation, which is what's mostly concerned. Okay. So that's with Llama CPP. So again, you're downloading this model and then it's interacting with Llama CPP, to incorporate C++ into this whole process of using generative AI. Now, another way of doing this, so you can look on the GitHub. Now, compared to other platforms, I would say it's just a little bit more on the expert side than some of the others. It's this G. Gurganov that runs it. This one. And again, so you could use interactive mode with this as well. So once you get up and running with these, it's usually okay. And usually there's some issue, just some random issue on your end that you weren't anticipating. That's my experience as opposed to the hardware or their specific, CPP hardware. So of course, NVIDIA has, and I did a GPT-4o search on this, and they said, or ChatGPT, they said it primarily uses C++. So this is basically a proprietary type of package here. So number one, with the GPUs, you'll need to access their GPUs. In certain parts of it, you can download it, but I think for compiling and some of the steps after, and is more. So it's going to be highly optimized. This is a huge company that's standing behind this, and it's basically you're taking your model, it's your architecture plus your weights coming from PyTorch, and then you're converting that to C++. So every time with inference, so just to make sure everybody's on the same page here, is typically, if Llama, like with Llama 3, they have to train a model, it goes on, you further fine tune it with your data, or say you want to retrain it. That's typically still done in, Python and PyTorch. It's easier to use. And then, the inferencing, which the colleague of mine actually says that it might account for more money than the actual training portions, because people would be prompting over and over again. So all this stuff with the Apple and Google, Android, mobile devices, that's inferencing. Like the weights are set and the architecture is set. So at that point, if you can get into C++, you could see these types of gains here that they're saying, 6x boost over standard PyTorch model. So what it looks like in the code here is basically this one that says model equals torch.hub.load. That's very common. So you'll see that a lot with Python. And then, so this is basically the PyTorch model. So the weights I think are PTH, which stands for PyTorch. Now, this is the part where you're using TensorRT. And again, some of the, you're going to have ability to customize things. And I think that the big reason why people use TensorRT is to get to the best GPUs, and then, figure their software is going to be very optimized to be very competitive as far as like the top, total possible speed obtainable if you have a PyTorch model. Okay. Now, the other one is OpenVINO. So OpenVINO this is Intel based, and he spent a significant time as other, if you look at other discussions online, it's all about compressing the model. If you don't get the size right, it just will run slow. And you look at it this way: if you're not doing a general task and you use a general model, you're kind of like wasting that size on those weights that are meant for something that doesn't even concern you. So, that's the whole thing with this, is that there's just, in generative AI in specific, it's just so, it's such a complex field, not complex, but it's so, open as far as the configurability, like you can do this and say, if you're using Llama 3, which is, open source for Llama 3 Instruct, that's based on 8 billion parameters, quantized to about that a third of it with like a Q4, then now you're talking, you're definitely talking on a laptop. And like I said, I think the thing with mobile devices, plan on it being, especially iPhones current and the ones before, at least less than 2 gigabytes in total size. Okay. So what OpenVINO does is basically it's proprietary software, and it uses similar types of techniques that have been mentioned here, as far as being C++ and, but there's a lot of steps. And actually I was attending one of the Apple talks this week. They're doing WWDC. They did talk a lot about bringing in your model to get it further optimized or to get it to run on some iOS. Now, when you're talking about C++, it's the same type of thing. Like, how big is it? If it's too big, and I'll show you on the next couple of slides with GPT for all, if it's too big, it slows, it just takes longer to process. So, the thing with OpenVINO is basically you can use Atom, Xeon, Core, these Movidius, Iris. I wouldn't, maybe not on an Iris if that's smaller, but the point is that every major platform has, significant development in generative AI. And I think the biggest thing right now is, with OpenAI, Microsoft actually has 49% in them. And then on top of that, OpenAI with GPT-4o, or ChatGPT 4o, I used here, is they'll be supplying Apple with. So it's this whoever has the best software wins kind of stuff. And if you're more like hands-off and you don't want to like customize this 10 different ways, then maybe a proprietary approach with OpenVINO or TensorRT is for you. And I can almost guarantee they're going to run well, the whole kind of thing. Now with GPT for all, this specific one, this Mistral, so I've been mostly focusing on Llama 3. If you've missed the previous discussions, get this software. It's really easy to download. I've downloaded on PC, or I'm sorry, Linux, Ubuntu. I've downloaded on, so this is obviously a top of the line, M3 Max, this MacBook Pro. And it's just very easy to work with. Some of the headings you have to, understand a little bit more. But you can add RAG to it, retrieval augmented generation. And, if you search for these things, it says, actually, if you go to their GitHub, a good portion, like 60-something% of their code is in C++. Okay. So there's different aspects that use it. And in this specific case, I asked, how does GPT for all utilize C++? And you see this, and this is with, it's basically a fine-tuned Mistral model. It's called Nui's Hermes 2, so you'll see them a lot on Hugging Face. So efficient computation, interfacing with external libraries, portability, performance optimization, and code reusability. Now, I wouldn't say that this is an out. I don't think this is, because I think they released like a version 0.3. I think this model is a little bit aging, but a lot of times you can look for, they'll just tack it on the second sentence. This makes it suitable for handling the complex computations involved in natural language processing, like those performed by GPT-4o. So you want to be careful a little bit with some of the, especially older models. But nonetheless, it's 3.83 gigabyte size. So this is getting up there. This would be hard to run on even a top of the line, iPhone, iPhone Pro, iPhone 15 Pro. And just because the way the RAM is. Okay, now this one in specific, I think this is the size that more people are looking for. And again, I asked it, what is the future of C++ for generative AI developers? As a language, C++ has been widely used in the field of generative AI for many years. However, recent advancements in AI and machine learning have led to the development of new programming languages that are better suited. So it does go on. It says, that being said, C++ is still an important tool. So this was done with Orca Mini, 3 billion parameters, and it's going to be a quantized model of the 3, I believe. It should be. And you'll see this GGUF format. So again, that's showing up in most of these as far as mobile applications, and this one too. And this one, I got the highest ever tokens per second on this laptop. It says metal was applied to it worth over 100 tokens per second. I wasn't able to get the 1e to the plus 02 into just standard notation. So I don't know if it's used to going that high. But so you saw in the other demo with the Llama CPP, that one was about 40. And then, this previous one, it was 64. So this is a bigger, 3 or close to 4 GB. But this is the type of size that I would anticipate people doing well with is under 2 GB, just because people have other apps open on their phone, and nobody's going to do RAM dumps or these types of things. And if you want to have a specific application, and especially with a C++ related program, I would highly suggest being under that 2 gig size. Just easier to download, faster to run. And all the Apple stuff too will be highly specialized to the phone. The internet stuff will actually be running in the cloud, the private cloud, just like with Siri, would store her information in the cloud. Now it's going to be for generative AI, for more internet expert. So figure less internet expert with smaller models, and then bigger models, internet experts, which is a big part too. Now, this was actually this is called libtorch. So it's the C++ form of PyTorch, and it feels very well established. So they said in 2018 at CPPCon, it's open source, and basically it shows you the code on the left. So if you've ever done PyTorch, this should be very familiar. Model goes torch.nn.linear. This is just, you see this a million times, and you could change the optimizer and stuff like that. And torch.utils.data loader, you see a lot of that too. And, this nice for loop as well. So what it looks like in C++ is here, and it's basically saying, it's supported to use. And I think the two main issues is the bulk of the programmers either don't want to learn C++ or it's too complex for them, because you have to get into compiling and then another step called linking as well. So you really have to understand what's going on using C++. So I think it's a for sure case if you can, convert whatever, PyTorch model or TensorFlow model into C++. So this is example of how the code looks. So you see this hash include, very similar to import torch, and then all this code torch NN linear model. And, you could change the optimizer, data loader. So it wasn't it wasn't nearly as complex. And again, I haven't gotten to the really, say in my, the third or fourth tutorial I code along with this, is basically it's very similar as far as what you're trying to accomplish with Python. Okay, so Python using PyTorch, or C++ using PyTorch or Torch libtorch. Okay, so this is an example of what's going on. So we see C++ front end and back end incorporation into PyTorch. So you'll see right here, and then also C++ back end with this as well. So, and it's seeming less and less like it's a competing with Python and these types of things. It's just for specific cases where you want usability and easy to read, then, it's more Python. And then for the speed kind of inferencing stuff, use CPP. Now, TensorFlow also has, so these are more kind of, I don't know if they're fully, I don't know TensorFlow's exact involvement with it, but there's CPP flow and then TensorFlow CMake, and basically gives you these options. You see it's written in C++, it's not written in Python. Okay, so for those two. And then they actually have this, so this is quite big. It's called the TensorFlow C++ API reference. So I would definitely check that out if you're looking at doing, TensorFlow with C++. So as a review, so C++ is utilized across many software libraries for speed. Generative AI inference with C++ allows for fast and controllable answers to user questions. And I've got a nice little kind of research table from a paper on the next slide that supports that. And Python is more for training, fine-tuning models. Say you get the parameters, you have the architecture, you use PyTorch to do that. PyTorch or TensorFlow with Python. And then you can convert to C++ for speed. Many IDEs across operating systems use C++. So this is Xcode, CLion, VS Code, and more. And then PyTorch dedicates a significant portion of its own code to C++. But it's not as full as if you make it to libtorch, for instance. Now, and I'll have the references up. So this is an interesting paper. So this is called Evaluating AI-Generated Code for C++, Fortran, Go, Java, Julia, MATLAB, Python, R, and Rust. It's on arXiv as a preprint this year, quite recently, the past couple months. And what it is basically you have ChatGPT 3.5 or ChatGPT 4.0. And 4.0 ChatGPT was kind of slow for me. So none of these actually include speed. Compilation, so did the code compile with a recent compiler? Runtime, did the code execute without errors? And correctness, did the code compute correct results? And then based on these, and it's ChatGPT 3.5 versus 4 for each of them, and they had in this specific table, and there's other tables too that you could check out because it's just there's a lot of research that was done. Is they had C++ being the only one across ChatGPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4.0 to have check marks for compilation, runtime, and correctness. And then you'll see Python, it just, it doesn't apply for compilation. Same thing with Julia. And then I hear a lot as far as Rust as a potential kind of like supplement or, these types of things. And apparently it struggled with correctness. Now, what this also shows is that it's based on generated outputs. So it's the generated outputs of ChatGPT 3.5 and 4. What they're showing here is a function of the language used to run the code. Okay. So it's quite interesting. I never thought of it like that. But basically, like I said, I'll have these up. And they said, and kind of like in the summary, they said, in terms of code quality, C++ and Java consistently demonstrated robustness across all the examples tested, followed by MATLAB. Okay. So, you see, especially for the 4.0, and I don't know the main factor if it's C++ has been out for a while. It's kind of tried and true, those types of things. But, it's an interesting perspective to figure these types of things exist on the web where, C++ is doing better than other types of languages. And it didn't even mention anything regarding speed here. It was more on those three metrics right there. Are there any questions? Any questions regarding the slides? Now, feel free to put in the chat and I'll definitely be monitoring that. And, it's exciting times. This is like perfect timing for like startup, young company, I would say. Just because you have to time all this, right? Like all the other research I did with quantum inspired tensor networks and parallel quantum algorithms, these types of things. Like it's cool, it's fun, but like the whole rest of the world, by this fall, when all the phones roll out with the new operating systems, Android and Apple are going to have significantly better utilities, due to these types of software. And again, it'll be split, between, the smaller models on the phone that can do those things. And then say they'll probably have, I think it's Apple's own private servers and probably the same thing for Android. It's the same thing how your data would be protected. It's in the cloud, but now ChatGPT 4.0 is applied to it. So, it's just really exciting. And I would say if you get a lot of these principles as far as small models, faster, limited functionalities, typically with size, if we're assuming like the same time, like the ones that came out this year, as opposed to the bigger models, internet experts up in the cloud, interacting just like how your backups would be protected over the web too, with bigger models, right? So they're significantly bigger. And ChatGPT 4.0 is really good. And like I said, if you haven't gotten to download it, you can download it on your phone. You should be downloaded on many different types of phones. And it's quick. So I try to spread it out. But if I need something as far as, Llama and Grok and these types of things, or Meta and Grok, it's very fast. You just open the tab and you're just typing a quick question, right? It's the fastest experience. Now, as far as tokens per second, I would still go with the Grok. And you could probably get away with writing a paper using just Grok, like the 4 different models that they use. So if you joined late, so basically, there's what's going on is there's large language models and there's multimodal models. And what I showed here is basically you can type in, produce a savable image regarding the benefits of C++ for generative AI inference, and it generated this, general type of image. And I think I had to increase the size. So I say increase the size of the middle one. And again, it's a generative model, right? So, it can vary, from prompt, from if you have the same identical prompt, it can generate different things. It's not like a Google search, which is just like memorizing facts and then here's this. But it also has that additional power of, more context with being understand what a user just said. And then, the output quality, as we've seen, across many different websites is a lot, more detailed, those types of things than your typical, Wolfram or Google search. And then now Google has Gemini, and some things actually do show up on as a generative answer instead of just a Google answer in the just using the same interface through google.com. And I'd like to hear from you, everybody, is basically how are you applying all this? And like I said, you're right. This is the time to be in the specific field. And I'd say after this fall, you'll have maybe a couple more months, but it'll just be mainstream. And now's the time to get involved. I'd say definitely on the coding end. And like I said, a lot of the fine tuning and kind of that stuff is still done with mostly Python, PyTorch, TensorFlow, but this is more like get the speed to run it over and over again. Just like how you would go to ChatGPT and ask a bunch of questions, that's inferencing over and over again. And even if I think ChatGPT usually just uses PyTorch, but that uses C++ inside PyTorch as well. But if you go to like Grok.com, which I showed you on this specific one, you're getting up to 1,200 tokens per second. And that's over 10x of what I'm at in this laptop. But again, this could probably be more fine-tuned, but it's not going to reach that level likely, to 1,200. It's lightning fast. So Grok.com, and this is the Llama 3 8 billion. They have the Llama 3 70 billion, which will knock you down to about 300 tokens per second. And then they have mixture of experts, which I think is more like 70 billion parameter in size, like comparable to the Llama. And, there's a lot of stuff out there. And I highly encourage everybody just to, if you haven't started doing it, definitely get into the Gen AI, especially before the fall. Are there any questions or comments? So regarding any of the slides, we'll start there first. And then feel free to put into the chat as well. And it's something as easy as like, doing tutorials, right? So I started with a C Lion, and then I got it to work in Xcode and then VS Code. And again, I would say the issue is probably not as big as you think with C++ if you hear other people talking about it, but it will get significantly more complex as your code gets more complex. And I've heard other people comment on that too. And, in all these, you just have to stick with it. So I'll go back to Llama C++, and this was just one tutorial. And then I tried to get the following, with this interactive mode to work. But basically, it comes down to speed and functionality. So say if like Llama is more like, it seems like they have like a greater, platform for people to develop with. And I just came across an iOS app on my phone, and it says you could run any Llama model, and Llama is up to date. They keep releasing new ones all the time. So there's like coming from the perspective where I was from, like with other type of research that I'm also going to incorporate, like an approximated forms of it, is like there might have been one big platform, but this has like many. And, and as simple as getting onto the GPT for all, definitely. And one thing with this is I would say, these models will have to get updated. And like I said, these are the two that I ran on this, which is basically a Mistral 7 billion fine tuning. And then it's also been quantized down to about 3.83 gigs. And then this Oracle one, again, this is in the size where people need to be at. But, I think the misconception or probably the misinformation with it, or people just don't understand, is a lot of times, these weights and parameters, if you're trying to do a specific thing on the phone, beyond just being an internet expert, I see a lot of room to work with there, because like instead of like all of the model size being dedicated to knowing a vast chunk of the internet, now these local, phone models, and we've seen on, with the Apple AI calls this week, is they'll be for specific tasks. And I don't think they'll take up nearly as much room as how we see like every model either being a good or great internet expert. Like say a great one would be ChatGPT 4.0. And then definitely with the Llama, so the Llama 3, 8 billion instruct, that's definitely like an expert too. But everything smaller than that should be designed for specific applications. And, especially like on a developer's perspective, is you're going to see, in my opinion, a lot of innovation here. Um, you know, Moving from that whole approach of internet expert for small models, but more like task specific, solver. And again, C++ can help with this too, with the speed. So, it's over 100 tokens a second is pretty good, on a local device. And on an iPad Pro with this one, it probably won't be 100, but something close to that. And, this software uses Metal. However, this is more it's a desktop chat client as opposed to, I haven't found it on iPad OS or iOS, and I haven't looked on Android. And it all comes down to application, application, what you're trying to do. And think of like very specific things. So if it's like for drug discovery, is there something like small model that people need? And you download a model and you don't allow that app to access the internet after it's downloaded. So that's a local contained model to do very specific tasks directly on your phone. So what's needed to do that? Like, is it like all the patient data that you have that you need to have that on that specific phone, or the iPad, or say desktops and laptops and those types of things? But there's a lot of room for development here. And I would say, it's going to be hard to compete with like the AlphaFold 3, and like you'll see with some of the other drug discovery companies, they'll say they're using NVIDIA's services for these types of things, and they're integrated into, it's not just generative AI models, it's biochemistry, it's a lot of things, that have been built up over time, especially. But yeah, feel free to put it in the chat, and, it's just very exciting times. And I think when you talk about production and you talk about deployment, you talk about CPP or C++, and, generative AI is definitely, the hot topic right now. And you'll just see it on different feeds as well. I mean, I talk about it a lot and it probably picks that up, but it's just, that's how it is. Now, on a historical perspective, with a lot of this, this Bjorn Strustrup back in 1985, it was released. I think that's part of it too. Is basically it's had so many years to kind of work out the bugs and people to get used to it. And again, where Apple's pretty locked down. They accept C++ on the Xcode I saw, where C++, C, Objective C, and Swift. Go ahead, Ron.
Yeah, Kevin, you were talking about you actually downloaded Chat GPT 4.0 to a machine.
No, that's for all. Yeah. So this
Oh,
one,
for all.
yeah,
Okay.
this is a desktop chat client. So this one, and they'll probably update it. I just checked. But when you scroll down in the upper, or I'm sorry, the lower left-hand corner, you go to download models, and then the first one is Llama 3, and then this is the second one. So it's similar in size. It's a little bit smaller. And, for this, it's Mistral based. And then this one's even further down because it's smaller. But yeah, I think that'll be kind of the next focus is really optimizing on, size, getting the size down for a specific task as opposed to it being the internet expert that everybody thinks or many people think every model should be. Because that's all the metrics, though it's their internet, they're based on, how will you know the internet. So
So this GPT for all it's not associated with OpenAI.
no,
It's
no,
somebody
you can
else. Okay.
actually, you can use an API key here, and then it'll
Uh,
just, every time you run it, it just, takes off your account. So the way that it works is you're charged a certain amount, for, say it's like $4, something like that, I think for GPT 4.0, for input tokens per million. Okay. So it's $4 per million input tokens. So it's a lot. I have never come across an issue where it felt like I was, going into debt or anything like that. Now, the other thing is the outputs. And I think the output is more expensive, but again, you control. So if you don't want verbose outputs, you can set the temperature down on your LLM or your LMM. And then so it doesn't create generations that are like huge book reports if you don't want it. So, say for instance, and I'll pop in there because I do recommend their software a lot, is I'm going to open GPT for all, and I'll show you, what I see. So, okay, so this is the interface here. So you can see, you start with the downloads. So you have to have the models downloaded. So the first one, Llama 3 Instruct, and then this is 4.3 gig. Now, keep in mind, not all Llama 3 Instructs are the same, right? Because they can be fine-tuned different, based on the software, based on the data set, whatever. Like this one probably has additional fine-tuning based on being an expert on GPT for all. Now, the next one here, I showed you the 3.83 gig is for quantization, they tend to use this Q40. With Llama CPP, you can go down even more. So it's basically, you'll see that a lot. It's kind of like that. There's an area if you quantize too much or if you compress too much, you lose quality, right? So this seems to be across many platforms, an appropriate level of compression, the Q40. So you'll see here, okay, so here's the ones for Turbo and 4. You see they haven't updated to 4. And all you have to do is get your key. So get your API key. And 3.5 Turbo is, it's probably still faster than 4.0, but ChatGPT 4 is slow. And then I would wait for maybe the 4.0. So you could see they're probably due for an update here. Now, these other ones are based on, so here's Falcon. So that seems to be on a laptop, a good MacBook or a good, i9 or i7 with, good RAM, like at least 16 gigs of RAM. you should be able to play with the less than 4 gigs models. Okay. And then this one, this Orca 2 full, you can see it's 7. So this will probably do this one well, but it's going to knock down the tokens per second for sure. But it's based on an older version of Llama 2. So I wouldn't go for those. And the other one that you need are, so you need for retrieval augmented generation. So this means if you have an application on a local device and you just want it, or you, on top of the model's own context, so whether it was tried to train on the internet or a chunk of the internet, you point your model to your own local documents. Now on this specific one, so I use SBERT, and here, so it says 43 megabytes. It's really small. Now, if you don't have that downloaded, I don't believe that you can use RAG, which is a huge feature here. Okay, so you can see, they have some models. It's not a ton. Definitely Llama has more. But if you go into settings here, you'll see.
But basically this GPT for all it's an application you download
Yes.
to your workstation, and then when you power it up, then it gives you this interface to further download specific models.
Yeah,
That
and I would say
okay.
it's appropriate for research, like for papers. I would probably cite that you use GPT for all, and it's just something that always works for me, and it's never not worked. And again, so these are my core LLMs, so I can select. And so here's what's going in, and you can adjust context length, so higher context length, more RAM, that type of stuff. And some things, this is still AI, right? So you have, batch size. And then what's unique to LLMs is top P, min P. So that's something that, can adjust the output, how the output behaves. Now, GPU layers, like with mine, it seems to default to metal. So hadn't changed with much of that. And here's an instance. So if you're penny pinching on your GPT-4o outputs, which in the coming years, especially this next year, I see the rates just going down. It's just becoming more ubiquitous and more people in. You can set the max length. So say, for instance, on the smaller model, the mini Orca, it doesn't produce much anyway, right? But on the bigger models like Llama 3, it just tends to, generate more words, which is more tokens. So temperature these are all like temperature, top P, min P, these are LLM specific values. So the higher the temperature, the more kind of flowery the language, the more basically, expressive, that type of stuff. And maybe lower temperature, the typically shorter responses, more concise. It doesn't have the ability to kind of like dream. And sometimes you want dreaming and sometimes you don't. And top K2 as well, so that's an LLM specific thing. Now, the other one here is basically, so you could just set my device, like I said, to metal or auto. So if you have CPU, like if you have Intel, you would just go to CPU and then set your threads. I had an issue on this one setting anything on my other laptop, which is like a Core i7, like last year model with Ubuntu. I had an issue with that one, anything above 4. So I just left it at 4. And you could do things with servers as well, enable API server, and you can do these types of things too. Now, the one you're probably going to be using most is this RAG. So again, for the time being, like for research and development, is that, you're really going to want to use RAG. So say, for instance, what's shown here, it doesn't show you what I'm seeing. So what shows on my phone or what shows on the laptop now is basically my downloads folder. So I pointed to a folder, and I've tried 2 PDFs and I've tried 3. Now, when you're talking about RAG, it'll search those preferentially using SBERT, that embedding model that I showed you. It still uses Llama 3, but on top of that, its highest priority is now these specific local documents that you're pointing to. typically PDFs. I'm sure if this one doesn't run it, I've seen with Excel sheets and these types of things, like it can search through. So that's an added functionality because it adds the original context stuff, Llama 3 or, Mistral, or whatever you're using. Plus, it's using that context to search through your documents. And then the output is not just Llama 3, it's Llama 3 plus your stuff that you're pointing to, like more with higher accuracy or specificity too.
Cool. So it sounds like you may have done some experiments with this GPT for all. Basically, the question is, read this document and then summarize it for me. That's simple sort of thing.
Well, I would get it even more specific than that. And
Sure.
I've used RAG in, Python, PyTorch, code, these types of things. And I'm trying to think where I used it. I've used it several times. There's another one, it's called not Llama CPP, but LangChain has a lot of demos too. So if you want super high performance, it's called Raptor. And that one, I gave it like 3 or 4 documents that I had saved locally. And say it was, the quality depended on part the model, so it can vary. Like say for instance, I think on a lesser model, this is in the past 3-4 weeks or something like that. On a lesser model, it focused more on me, like Kevin Kawchak, as opposed to what the question was. And then it got off on the shoot saying like Kevin Kawchak is an expert as opposed to trying to answer the question. So and that's where the R&D comes in with the settings, top P's and, min P's and top K's and those types of things.
Sounds good.
Yeah. So, and everybody out, definitely watching this online too, is definitely think about what you want your application to be and then work backwards. Because, a lot of times if you just don't know, you have to go through a bunch of stuff like I just did in, over 3 months. And now I kind of have a lot better idea as far as like, do I want this to be an internet expert or do I not? And if you don't want it to be an internet expert, I think that opens up a lot of doors to keep really small models that do specific tasks. And say like with the Apple stuff on the tablets, like you type, e to the 4 plus 3 or whatever, and then you go equals, and then it just does it for you. Like it's trained on similar types of data with many people drawing or whatever. So yeah, I think that's kind of where the sweet spot is like, say the big companies, they have that power. They've generated these or produced these models, that have a lot of internet capability, like internet expert capability. And I think the open door for a lot of other developers, and especially for applications, is going to be less on that and then more for specific applications, or say like, I needed to be an expert in math, so I'm only going to use math libraries, in my code in C++ or Python, and then, do go in that direction and get the model size down. Because a lot of it is, the context that these models pick up are based on, a vast majority of the internet, and then they get compressed again, and you're still trying to keep that functionality, which you're going to lose some, right? Because the original model is going to be better. It's not truncating the weights. So a different approach would be, think about the application, think about the, what you have to import for libraries. And, but yeah, that's the thing is most people associate the software with just like prompt, and then generation or output. And, we're going to see a lot of, and I would keep an eye on, all the Android stuff too. It seemed to be like there was a lot, maybe more chatter with that. And, the proprietary software too, that we're going to use, this fall, that has a lot of the Gen AI in it as well. Any other questions? So yeah, let's see. As far as, but this one is not easy it's not hard to figure out, I would say. And if I go to close window, and then the other one I wanted to show is you have to get this. It's so convenient here. And okay. So it has all the other previous searches. So that's how some of these are different. So something like the Grok that does the really fast, LPU, language processing unit, compared to, this ChatGPT 4.0. Now, I think I had to pay $20 a month for this, and sometimes it'll return speed. How fast is this generation in tokens per second? And it's not lightning fast, like I would say the Grok is. So 20 to 40 seconds, yeah, under optimal. Now, if I switch over to 3.5 and I do the same thing, and I type in, but I think it's faster than that. So usually generations 1 to 3 tokens per second. So you see it kind of hesitates at first. And with that specific one, then it kind of blurts it all out. So I think that's what's causing it to, for that generation to kind of go down. But if I show you the Grok, and again, this is easy, Grok is very easy. And I switch over to this specific one. Now, the first thing that I have is, so I want to do this. So if I type in how fast is this generation in tokens, it returns it anyway per second. Okay, so I'm going to copy that. And now if you look in the upper right hand corner, this is Llama 3 8,081,92, and I'm not sure how fine-tuned this is or what the size of it. And I click play. It says 1200 for that specific one. So it could be how they calculate too, because maybe the OpenAI was a little bit faster, and maybe this one was slow because you saw it took a little bit to get it in, and then it jumped it out. And if I switch out to, this Llama 3 70 billion, we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at speed, and we're going to look at the amount that's produced. Okay, so this one actually, every new generation goes to the top. It's unlike the other ones, but you could set it to pop up to the top, which I did. And then you can see it gives a more thorough response. And it's probably in the capability of the other one too, but you see the tokens per second is 355. And then, it's just, it's going to be slower. It's a bigger model, like it has more processing. It takes more processing time to go through it, right? To inference through it, right? And this partly uses the CPP. And this one in specific just does large language models. Now the GPT 4.0 or the Chat GPT 4.0, that does multimodal. And so does Gemini. And Gemini, I think that you have to have, say, for instance, let's just go straight to that. So I think that you have to pay for business. So if I go to chat, you do not have access. So I turned it off for business because it was giving me some lower model for Gemini. And then so I don't use this as much. But the other one is Meta. And Meta, I used a lot when it first came out. Now I'm using more for, ChatGPT 4.0. And the cool thing about this is I don't even have to switch tabs. And this is multimodal. So multimodal is anytime beyond text, basically. So imagine, really fast computers. And the cool thing, you see it's generating as I'm typing. So if I want to go back, I can get that previous generation. And if I want to go forward, I get it back. So that's a cool, this wasn't available on my previous phone. I'd have to try it again, using C++. Okay. Now, if I click on this, I can download it. And if I go, it's really like up to your imagination. Imagine 10 images of a really fast computer using C++. And the key is to push enter. Okay. So I think it actually does default to 4. So right now it's processing. And I've created some, they're photorealistic things like this, but I don't know if you have something like that sitting on your desk. But you see the Starbucks. Now, there's certain things that some of these, if you do images with text, like that Starbucks logo is not going to be 100%. And it's either if you do people, and I don't think Gemini does people, or one of these doesn't do people, but it's usually the hands and the face that it has a hard time doing. So anyways, this is based on Llama 70 billion parameter, okay? And if I type in, so what are you based on? And then Llama 3, oh, this one actually says 40 billion. So I didn't even know they had a 40 billion. So I think it was for Llama 2. But that's interesting, right? Because sometimes these aren't, fully as they should be. So Meta.ai is good to use. It's tied in with your Facebook. So if you have Facebook, you can use Meta.ai. And I've had colleagues that said, they had issues using it. They were trying to access something with their friends. And sometimes you just have to be more specific. So what main languages, programming languages is Meta AI based on? So Python, C++, okay, Java, JavaScript, those types of things. But this should be the 70 billion parameter. So these things can happen, as you know. Awesome. Any other last questions or comments? But yeah, if it's the tutorials and these types of things, I would like to show you Sea Lion because I have used it a lot recently. And I'm working through this tutorial. So stop, and then we're gonna go. If you haven't used Sea Lion, it's pretty good. The only downside is you have to pay. So I think after 30 days. But yeah, this is a code along that I'm working on. So say, for instance, sometimes with Zoom, and that's Sea Lion. So in this specific one, it's a calculator 9, operator divide, and then second number 4. So I think it's division without mod, right? So it doesn't give the remainder there. Any other last questions? I think you're on mute, George. Awesome. So anything else? So we're going to wrap up here. And again, this has been Thursday, June 13th, 2024, episode 139 for C++ with generative AI. And, definitely, keep coding all throughout the summer and keep working on applications. Have a good rest of the night and have a productive rest of the week. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.